I was talking with my brother recently about interview questions and how best to deal with them. And when we were talking, I realized there was actually a hidden pattern to the best interview answers that I've ever heard as someone who's interviewing someone else, or given myself as an interviewee. So in this video, I wanted to share with you this hidden pattern. And this hidden pattern is useful not just for answering interview questions, but it's also a great framework for thinking about life's problems and any big decisions that you have to make. Now, I don't profess to be an expert at interviews by any stretch, but having got through over the last 15 years, Oxford interviews, corporate law interviews, pupillage interviews for the bar, not all successfully by any stretch, I've picked up a fair bit of experience doing interviews myself, and now as the CEO of Islamic Finance Guru, I interview other people, and so I've seen it from the other side of the table as well. And so I'd like to pull all of that together in this video and share with you some of those tips. What I'll be doing today is answering 4 interview questions. 3 of them are taken from the Oxford interview process, and 1 of them is taken from the Fidelity Asset Management interview process. I've actually not answered 3 of these questions before, so it's going to be pretty raw, and you will probably see me struggle with at least some of them. I'll be just filming one take. The first thing that comes into my head and the way I approach it for the first time is what I'll show you. So I may get some of these wrong as well, or not do so well on some of them, but that's all part of the fun, right? Before we begin, Islamic Finance Guru, or IFG for short, is a halal investment and personal finance platform where we analyze, review and compare all the latest and greatest Islamic financial products coming out of the financial world. Our mission is really simple. We want to help Muslims everywhere get wealthier and put their money to work. If that sounds like it's up your street, then please do like this video, please subscribe to the channel, and please do share this video with your friends and family. If you'd like to chat with me and tens of thousands of like-minded others, then please do join our Telegram groups. The links are in the description below. Let's dive in. Right, so the first question is, do you believe in the Loch Ness monster? I'm feeling nerves, Kabzi, on this one, even though it's just me in a videoing thing. Do I believe in the Loch Ness monster? Okay, so the question is around belief, right? Do I believe in the Loch Ness monster? And obviously, prima facie, the Loch Ness monster is this entity that, it's a monster, right? So it doesn't, prima facie, it wouldn't exist. But of course, there have been sightings of this monster, and there's some data points out there that suggest that perhaps it could exist. So the question is, how do I approach the belief in any, I guess, belief, but also beliefs in things that are edge cases or where there isn't as much data. And I guess the way that I would approach it is thinking about belief as a what is my belief methodology. I think my belief methodology, like with most people, would be that firstly, at a basic level, you need to trust your senses, your eyes, your ears, your mouth, your nose, the data that's coming into there. If you doubt that, then you can't really believe anything. So I think you need to trust that. And then after that, you're looking at where that data is coming from. If it's first-hand experience and it's a good kind of reliable atmosphere, etc., and you see the Loch Ness monster, then I think I would be much more inclined to believe it, and maybe not on its own, but I would be much more inclined. But in my situation where I've never seen the Loch Ness monster, the way I would approach it is looking at the data set. If I guess there's two beliefs here as well. Like, one is like I genuinely need to make a decision about if I believe in the Loch Ness monster. Let's say I am a researcher or something and I need to make a decision. So there's one approach I would take for that. And then the other one is, the casual armchair critic, which I guess is where I am now, and the belief system that I would have for that. So let's ignore the rigorous approach for now, and let's just focus on the approach for the individual. And I think my gut instinct answer would be no. And the reason is because, like with most armchair, beliefs, you look at credible people in the world, let's say the New York Times or the BBC or whoever it is, and or scientists, and what they're saying. And if they are saying that they believe in the Loch Ness monster, then you should be more inclined to believing them, and then actually believing that the Loch Ness monster is true. But if most of these people are saying that it isn't true, then I think the sensible approach would be to not believe in the Loch Ness monster. And I think the reason for that is because we as human beings only have a very, very limited experience of the world. And in order for us to have a proper belief system that is coherent, I think there needs to be a lot of trust based on other people and their testimony. Because if we don't have that trust, then we don't even believe the earth is round, for example, or we don't believe that Australia exists if we've never been there. So in a nutshell, my answer is I don't think the Loch Ness monster exists, because the general trend within credible people within society is that the Loch Ness monster doesn't exist. So the next question is, you're the head of the prison service in the UK, and the question is, would you be giving omega-3 tablets to prison inmates as part of their normal diet or not? And a bit of context on the question is that omega-3 tablets are good for the body. They don't make you like a superhuman or anything, but they're good for the brain function and general health of a person. So the question is, would you give it to prison inmates or not as part of the regular diet? So my answer to this question would be, let's have a look at the way that you should make your decision as the head of the prison service. Like, what is the point of prison in the first place? The point of prison is, I guess, a mixture of retribution for the victims, or rehabilitation for the prisoner, and perhaps it's a mixture of the two. And if you take the retribution analysis, that this is something that should be punishing the prisoner, and they should be curtailing some of their freedoms as a result of some evil thing they did or immoral thing they did, then of course the natural conclusion to that would be that you don't give them anything other than the absolute necessary stuff to enable them to survive. So omega-3 tablets would definitely be a luxury, right? We don't need that to survive. On the other hand, if you go for the rehabilitation approach, where the understanding is that, look, we as a human society want to do good in society, and people are human beings and they make mistakes. And sure, they need to be, for the safety of society, they need to be rehabilitated. But the focus of the prison is about trying to improve that person and make them a better person that exits that prison in a better state. And I think one of the effective ways that you can actually do that as part of this rehabilitation process is by not having such an austere and minimalist approach to prison life. It should be that we treat you as a human being, and here are not just fish and chips every. Maybe fish and chips is a bad example, but here's like a really simple meal, beans on toast every single day. I think you can give them a bit more than that if you're going to rehabilitate them. And so omega-3 tablets could well enter that spectrum, especially if you see that there's research that will suggest that it's good for these individuals. And I guess the answer that I would personally fall down on is that I would be a little bit more on the retribution end of the spectrum, because I think that even if you have that rehabilitation element to your mindset, omega-3 tablets in particular are a high-end luxury. It's not like saying I'm going to mix up the menu to give you a few different meals. It's like saying I'm going to give you something that's fairly expensive, and even normal people don't have this, and I'm going to give it to you in particular, and there doesn't seem to be any particular rehabilitation benefit to it. So I would say I wouldn't give it, and I wouldn't give it because I think the retribution element is more important here. So this is a good question. Should colonial architecture be preserved? So I guess the underlying themes here are that you've got this wider movement in society where colonial statues are being torn down. You've got the roads movement going on, and what have you, and I guess this is linked to that somewhat. but I think this is saying, architecture generally, should that be preserved or not? Not just a statue, not just a symbol, but architecture itself. But this is going further than that, isn't it? Because it's asking not just about statues, it's saying architecture in generally, i.e. buildings or museums, etc., that were built during the colonial period or with colonial architecture. And I think that there's a prior decision that we need to take in order for us to be guided by that. And I think the prior decision is, does morality imbue within an architecture? Is the structure itself something that takes on the immorality of the acts that happen within it, or the immorality of the environment around it? So let's give a case study to try and work out what our answer to that is. So you've got a few different examples. You've got Auschwitz, the concentration camp, and the immorality there, I think, is actually really inextricably linked with that architecture. And so I think you've got a certain situation there, and then you've got other situations where the proximity of the immorality is probably a bit more distant. So there were slavers in Jamaica and other places where they sent money over, and they actually did a lot of the building of the large buildings, even governmental buildings today in places like Liverpool and other places around the country, including Oxford libraries. And so to then say, okay, well, this is colonial architecture, or this is, in some way it's an immorality that is attached to this architecture, I think that would be quite a distant link. And the reason why I think this is not a useful or pragmatic approach to take to this question is because otherwise, you would be saying, all of the money or all of the activities that anyone has ever done, because everyone is immoral to some level, would then be imbued within any architecture. And so you'd be just like pulling down architecture or not preserving it left, right, and center. So to answer the immorality question, I think that, we can set that aside unless, deeply immoral and like hurtful activities were taking place within that that building. And even then, I think there's a separate question if you want to preserve it, for as a kind of reminder of the ills that were done so that they're never repeated. So that's a separate question. And then I think there are other themes that we could potentially explore here as well, which is what about this whole preservation aspect? Is the immorality aspect even relevant to this? Because preservation of something, and the aesthetic of it doesn't in itself mean that it is immoral. So I think there's a wider discussion that we can have around aesthetic and the link with immorality, as opposed to the the very geographical, physical analysis that I've been doing so far. So would I preserve colonial architecture? I think ultimately I probably would, on the basis that I don't think that the morality of human action necessarily imbues within buildings and architecture. This is a good one. The Middle East or Africa, where would you invest $10 billion? And the context, of course, is that this is a Fidelity interview, so they're an asset manager. Okay, so where would I invest $10 billion? Ultimately, you're looking at a 10-year time horizon here, and the core thing that you want to do is make money. So the question is, where would you make more money over a 10-year period, Middle East or Africa? I think there's a few different threads to look at here. The first is, the macroeconomic picture, and which country, which region has more potential. So I would look at a few different things here. I'd look at the growth of the population. I'd look at have they got to the tipping point where there's going to be a real spurt in the economic growth of that region, and then I would look at the existing the existing situation, i.e. how far on that growth journey have they got to as well. So if we apply that analysis, then this macroeconomic analysis to Africa, I'd say that Africa needs a huge amount of infrastructural spend. It's a growing population. There's obviously an inequality of growth across the different countries. It's not just one monolithic entity. Africa has lots of different countries. But high level, I think there's a lot of potential there. And particularly in those regions where you've already had a fair bit of investment. So places like Nigeria, Kenya, Zambia, the Chinese have been very involved there, South Africa, Egypt. I think there are places where you can piggyback off a whole mountain of billions of dollars has already been invested, and then accelerate your investment as part of that. And as a public investor, you want to get in at the point. The reason why I was talking about the timing is you want to get in at a point where there are relevant publicly listed entities, or there are relevantly large entities that make sense for you as a public investor with a different risk appetite to get in at that point. Then I think if you apply the same kind of analysis to the Middle East, again, this is a growing population, but it's a considerably smaller population. I'd say the returns that are possible here are arguably a little bit less, because a lot of that development has already taken place. I mean, look at places like Dubai and Riyadh and others. There's a lot of development that's happened, and I think the other important factor here is that if you look at when you say invest in the Middle East, I assume that means investing in Middle Eastern companies as opposed to companies that are involved in the Middle East. And if we take that approach, then a lot of the value, I think, in the Middle East has actually accrued to companies outside of the Middle East, because culturally, over the last few decades, the Middle East has been inviting foreign companies to come in, and they've actually taken huge amounts of fees and profits from the growth of the Middle East, and taken those profits elsewhere. So if you are saying investing in the Middle East as in investing in Middle Eastern companies, I think the analysis there is slightly weakened by that. Whereas in Africa, I think a lot of the people that have made money in Africa are born and bred Africans, right? And so I think the analysis there, and culturally, the analysis there is strengthened by investing in Africa. So as just on a pure macro level, my thinking would be to go towards Africa. I think Africa is a lot less stable than the Middle East, arguably, I guess. But I think overall, the risk-reward ratio is much higher with Africa, and over a 10-year time horizon, I would expect that to kind of smooth out. So my just gut instinct, macro level analysis would be, let's go for Africa. Okay, that was intense. I guess now if we reflect on, 4 things that I was trying to do during that process. The first is I was trying to unpack the question a bit more, to really understand it, and also to give myself time to think about the question and its implications, because interviewers really don't care about your answer to what the Loch Ness monster, if it exists or not. What they care about is the way you think about answering that question. So you want to show them that you're thoughtful and you're thinking aloud, and showing them the process. The next thing I would do is set up guide rails around the answer and the structure that you're going to follow. So if you noticed, with the prison example, I set up these kind of 2 ways of analyzing the morality of prison. With the Loch Ness monster, I thought about belief and let's unpackage why we believe in things that we believe in. So it's setting up guide rails around your path to the answer, and then going on that journey, because obviously the journey is what they're interested in. And if you are showcasing that you're setting up good quality guide rails and they can follow your answer, then that's 90% of the job done. The other thing that I did was give structure to my answer. And what I mean by that is, what I was doing is signposting ahead of time that, look, I'll be covering this, I'll be covering this, I'll be covering this, and these are just parked there, and you keep them in your head and then you carry on. And what that means is, for the interviewer, they feel like they're not just, being talked at, they feel like they're being taken on a journey. And that's super important because otherwise you can end up losing people, and it makes it more engaging for them as well. And then the final thing that you should be doing is thinking through counter arguments. Or perhaps, I don't know if I did this as well as I could have done in these questions, but you want to diffuse potential counter arguments, but you also want to set up potential lines of analysis that come to your mind whilst you're speaking. So in the colonial architecture question, I threw out another potential line of analysis that I've not touched on, but I've thrown it out there. And the reason why you want to do that is because typically interviewers will then pick on that as a follow-up, and they'll be like, oh, okay, tell us more about that. And what you are now doing is you're actually controlling the direction of the interview, because they could have picked up 5 or 6 other things that you haven't thought about. But if you're throwing out a couple of things here or there as you go and just parking them, they'll likely pick on that. And because you've already started thinking about it subconsciously, you'll be much better placed to answer that question than anything else. Always give an actual answer to the question. It doesn't have to be right or wrong. What you're doing is you're showcasing that not only can you do the analysis, but that you're not someone who just sits on the fence. You're someone who actually uses that analysis and then connects it up with a real life decision that you've made, and it makes sense on the basis of what you've said. So make sure you answer the question as well. Okay, so now that we know this, these hidden patterns of answering questions, how does this apply to real life? So I think it applies to real life in lots of ways. Whenever you're making any big decision, or even any small decision, or you're approaching a problem, how you approach it, I think, is the key thing to making good decisions. Because ultimately, look, we live in an imperfect world with imperfect information. We will never make 100% right decisions every single time. But the point is, if we've got a good system, we'll make good decisions about 60 to 80% of the time. And if you're in that zone, then you'll be a successful person. So how do you approach making decisions? Well, you unpack the problem, the implications, and you do it quite quickly. You don't go really, really deep. It depends, I guess, on the level of the decision. But you can do it fairly quickly and get to 80% right answer within 2 to 5 minutes. And then you talk to people, you get the relevant data that you need, you make sure you think through all of the implications, you have a process for making decisions. Usually, like, you'll say, okay, let's put it time bound it, right? And we're going to make this decision in X time. And that really helps get to a point. It really helps set a process. And then finally, actually make a decision. Don't just let it meander, don't just let it peter out. It's your life, you should own it. You can change the answer as well. If you get it wrong, you can always change it. But the point is, set a good process, make a decision, and then stick by it. So there you have it, folks. Different kind of video for you today. If you enjoyed this more careers and productivity type of video, then please do let me know in the comments below, and we can make lots more of these kind of videos. Also, if you correctly choose which one of the 4 questions in this video I actually answered before, then I will choose at random one of the correct answers, and we'll send over a free IFG hoodie to you as well. Until next time, Assalamu alaikum.